Well, do I have something different for you today, y'all? So we got epoxy and we got iron powder, soft magnetic iron powder. What does all this mean? Let me explain. This bike was originally conceived as being electric, but then one long sleepless night I thought, why only have it be electric? Let's also add a gas engine component. So the gas engine's over here, as you've seen, and this bike has new tires, but I have not shown you the electric motor that much. In the WrenchItUp video where I built this frame, you could see the motor being tested and stuff, but I didn't explain anything. I didn't say anything about that motor, so here it is. Now, there's a couple cool things about this motor, right? So, the stator is 3D printed. Yeah, so, if you take a closer look. Come on, focus. You fuck. So, the stator is 3D printed. It was printed in multiple sections because my printer kept extruding. My printer kept clogging, so I had to print it in multiple pieces and glue it all together to make this entire stator core. This is the Protopasta ferromagnetic PLA. So it's about 10% iron powder, and it's PLA, so its glass transition temperature is about 60 degrees Celsius. So there were a couple problems with this whole setup, right? This motor, first of all, was my second attempt at winding my own brushless motor that I designed. The first attempt was horrible. It was printed in 4 sections which weren't concentric to each other and was a pain to wrap because the wire gauge was too thick and the gaps between the teeth were too big, or were too small, so I couldn't fit the wires in between them. Wrapping that monster took like 20 hours and I fucking hated every second of it. So I tested this motor with a Kelly speed controller limited to 30 amps. I applied my powerful hand to its shaft as a load, and at 30 amps for about a minute, the coils got up to about 60 degrees Celsius, and the teeth started to become flaccid. Like you could move them with your fingers, and everything was really warm. It was not a good situation for a motor. Now, again, the reason why I 3D printed the stator and didn't use iron laminations or electrical steel, etc., was because I don't have the money or the resources or the time to have someone else make those for me. I cannot make these laminations, so I thought of other different stator designs and stator materials that I could use so I could make this thing at home, or in my little dinky shed. Now, I don't believe the world's ever tried this before, so I guess this is a world first. But I'm going to swap out the plastic with iron filings in it to epoxy with iron filings in it and pour it into a mold, or make a casting, right? So first things first, I have to figure out what ratios I can get the iron powder and epoxy to mix together in so it's still pourable and fills all the gaps within the stator molds. So the goal here is to see how much iron I can stick into the epoxy while it's still being completely electrically insulative and also pourable into the mold. So we're going to have iron to epoxy, and I'm trying for maybe a 1-to-1 ratio, a 2-to-1 ratio, who knows, maybe even a 10-to-1 ratio. It all depends on how much iron I can get into that epoxy while still being able to fill cavities like this. There's going to be some other design changes to this motor. First, right now this motor has 48 teeth, which means there are 48 coils. 3 pairs of, what's 48? What's the math? Fuck it. So there's 48 teeth, and there's 3 sets of coils because this is a 3-phase brushless DC motor. And I'm going to be changing that from 48 teeth down to 30 teeth. Now, this does 2 things. First of all, it makes my life so much easier because it's less coils to wrap. It makes the teeth bigger so more epoxy and iron can get in there, helping the magnetic field get to the magnets. By the way, if I get any of this wrong, any of this theory, or if I'm misunderstanding something, please tell me in the comments. I really want to learn and figure out more about brushless motors. I'm doing my best based on intuition and what I've read online. So thanks to an online motor calculator in my ignorance, this motor mathematically has about a 75% efficiency rating. If I switch it to 30 teeth, the 28 magnets, it goes down to, or actually, wrong direction, it goes up to 95% efficiency. So it makes my life easier, it makes wrapping easier, it makes the stator more powerful and more rigid and stronger, and also allows for better like mold making with the epoxy and iron, because the teeth themselves are physically bigger, and I don't have to use as much plastic now, so it just should decrease time, increase efficiency and power, everything good. So one of the major changes from going 48 to 30 teeth is, so now the teeth, instead of being like skinny triangles, oh god, that's awful, they now are rectangular and have a larger tooth pattern. So this area is going to be filled up with epoxy and iron. So the reason why I'm going with epoxy and iron, because the biggest drawback to stators in electrical motors is that there are things called eddy currents. So the magnetic fields being generated around these teeth from these coils cause electrical currents to flow around in the steel or iron laminations, causing heat and their own opposing magnetic fields, basically breaking the motor. So we want to avoid all this as possible. Now, if we can stick as much iron powder in these teeth or in the stator as possible without it conducting electricity, the better. So I'm going to first be experimenting with soft magnetic iron powder, mixing into epoxy in different ratios to see how much iron I can get in a certain area while still being like moldable into these little mold tests. So I'm gonna do 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, and probably 10 to 1. That's probably not gonna work. I'll see how it goes, and then pour them into these tests, and we'll see how well the epoxy pours and fills all the crevices, etc. So for mixing epoxy and iron powder, I'm going to be mixing them together in those ratios based on volume, not weight, because I don't have a scale right now. I'm in the middle of nowhere with barely any of my tools, so we're just gonna have to make do with what we have, and I'm going to mix it together with my drill and some bent bolt or something. I have no idea how well any of this is going to work, so we're gonna figure it out as it goes. So I bought these painter liners from Home Depot because they were extremely cheap, but I didn't realize like how thin this plastic is. So I did some thinking, and the epoxy is already kind of thick, and iron powder is only going to make that worse, so I'm going to change the ratio I'm mixing this in. So I'm going to do, so I got a 1/4 cup mixer right here, since these cups I have are way too big for the small amounts I'm working with right now. This is all just testing, so basically first I'm going to do half of a 1/4 cup, so 1/8 cup into a 1/4 cup of epoxy. So the way I'm going to mix this is I am going to start here with a full cup of resin in the mixer, and then, wait, shit, what am I talking about? I should definitely put on gloves. You know, when the gloves go on, shit's about to get serious. There we go. That's half of the job. Alright, so it's time to mix a what did I say? Shit, I already forgot. And this is the part A, the resin. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to do a full 2 parts to 1. First of all, with the amount of materials I have, as well as just how thick this resin is to begin with. This stuff is like almost like tar. It's really thick. So this is going to be very interesting. Well, shit, this stuff's already starting to get everywhere. This is just splendid. So I unfortunately only have one of these cups. So I'm going to have to do my best to scrape all the resin out and then put the iron powder in here. So I'm doing my best to get exact measurements. I guess this is more just to get a feel of how viscous the iron epoxy mix is. So I'm doing my best to keep this scientific and repeatable, but there's only so much me in a basement with a budget of nothing can do. Alright, now I'm gonna go for half a quarter cup, so 1/8 of a cup. I'm going to mix it approximately halfway. So this stuff is super fine. I'm gonna, there, so that's about, that's a little bit over. I can't really pour it, well, whatever, it's going back anyways. So I'm now mixing the iron and the resin, and it looks like really dark chocolate, like something you'd put in the oven. It looks really good, but remember, kids, Play-Doh, it's fun to play with, not to eat, like my dip. So now we've got our chocolate of death. Let me get some more paper towels. I guess I will also use the drill a little bit in mixing. There, that is a very nicely mixed mixture. I guess I'm also going to mix in the part B as well, and then pour it into its respective mold. And then we'll repeat this process, but with a different ratio of iron powder to epoxy. Well, the other great news is that the hardener is like water. It's much more viscous, and I like that. So I'm gonna do about 1/8 of a cup because it's a 2-to-1 ratio. I'm going to pour this in. Look at that. I'm going to get all of this shit out of this cup. Actually, now that I think about it, this cup's basically gone. I'm never getting this one back. I guess that's thoroughly mixed. Alright, as you can see, the mixture is now bubbling, just like the bottle says. I'm gonna let that sit. Actually, I'm gonna start working on the next mixture as that sets up. I shouldn't have bought these liners, they're so cheap and flimsy. Oh my god, this is a lot harder to mix. As you can see, the iron is still solid and it looks like all the liquid's like being absorbed. I don't know if I can get a ratio any higher than this. Maybe I should add some of the hardener to make this a little easier to mix. Alright, so we're gonna do a quarter of a cup, or half of a quarter into there. I'm gonna let that sit up. Let's pour the first one. Also, another thing I'm watching out for is how much heat builds up in these mixtures, because the high heat could cause the plastic molds to melt. And if I'm going to be pouring this into a 3D printed mold, then I'm going to have to worry about the mold actually melting, which is, you know, very bad. Alright, I've opted for a cardboard little covering so the owner of this house, which that is not mine, doesn't get angry. So I'm going to try carefully pouring this mixture, which is actually kind of running. runny, which is a good thing. Is there a sharper corner to pour it to? These are not the best containers for doing this, but we'll just do it really carefully. Alright, that's almost it. Just a couple more drops. There, so now you can see it. Just a couple more. There, fill that to the top. Wow, we still have a lot left over. I did not calculate that volume very well. Well, oops. Let's dress this mold up a little bit. It's going to be hard doing this for the final product without spilling anything. That looks pretty clean to me. So that is our 0.5 iron to 1, or 1 to 2 iron to epoxy. So now I'm going to place this in a safe spot and move on to the next. Alright, we've got our 1 to 1 mixture here. I'm going to mix it one more time. I think I'm going to lower the amount of epoxy I'm using in the whole overall thing because I'm mixing more than I need for these molds here. Actually a lot more than I need, so oops. It's okay. I guess I can do some like electric conductive tests with these with the leftovers and like test their heat resistance and stuff. So yeah, this one is way thicker, still pours very well, and it looks like it's filling up all the gaps. Thankfully it's a lot cleaner too. I'm not getting any dripping over the sides. This mold is only 1 perimeter thick, so I'm just being careful and seeing if any epoxy spills out the sides, and it looks like these are epoxy tight, if like watertight but with epoxy. Alright, that's our 1 to 1 done. Alright, so for the leftover mix that we don't need, I'm gonna pour some quick small paths down here with our mixtures, so I can test if they are, we can test if they are electrically conductive at all. I really hope they're not, but just in case, now I can measure along the length of a small path with like a voltmeter and see if it conducts electricity. Hopefully that doesn't spread out too much. Okay. So that's, you can't really see it. So that is 0.5 to 1. This one's going to be 1 to 1. This one shouldn't spread as much, but the cardboard is doing a good job keeping it from moving. You can definitely see in the 1 to 1 mixture that it's definitely a lot glitterier with all the new iron shavings, so it makes it a little brighter, so it's not as black. Oops, we spilled a little. Oops-a-daisy. There goes my perfect testing rig. What is it? The 3 to 2 mixture. So for this one, I am going to cut down the amount I'm using. I'm going to do my best to eyeball 2/3 of a quarter of a cup, because honestly this is more material than I need. I don't want to waste any, so I'm just going to do a little more than a little less than a quarter of a cup. So now I'm gonna do a quarter of a cup plus like a quarter of a quarter, so like a 1/16 of an entire cup. I mean, thanks to the imperial system, this is just great. Math and stuff. I don't know if this is gonna mix into a liquid or not. This is still mostly just powder. Oh look, more sirens. The police are they found me. Our last mold. Let's see how well this goes. Oh man, that's thick. This is gonna be an adventure. Just pour it really slowly so it fills all the gaps. It is flowing, but pouring the final mold with this stuff is going to be really tough. You have to go very slowly, make sure it gets everywhere. I'm going to pour the last trace on that piece of cardboard right here, so I can test if this mixture is conductive to electricity, which would be bad, because that means eddy currents would be going everywhere. They aren't the prettiest, but they'll do the job just fine. Alright, well, I guess I might as well put these together and put all my trash in one place. This could be a useful container, so I'll save that for a rainy day. Alright, so the molds are going to sit overnight. As you can see, they are bubbling up now. So we got our 1 to 2, 1 to 1, and 1.5, sorry, wait, yeah, 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 1.5 to 1, and that is iron to epoxy. One thing that I've already noticed, so on these molds, if you look underneath the 1 to 2, the most runny, it's starting to leak through the bottom, actually. So that's going to be interesting. 1 to 1 is not leaking at all, and 1.5 to 1 is not leaking either. That just little blob right there is just from it dripping over the side. So all of them are filled to the brim. And over here, my 3 conductive tests are now drying. They look sparkly, and you can see them bubbling. So they're setting, and so tomorrow morning-ish, I should be able to test these for like how magnetic they are, and I should be able to wrap some coils around them, possibly get some good testing and see like how well they work. Hey guys, so it's the morning after, and I think he used protection, so I should be all set. But as you can see, our samples have dried. I only got a little drippage on the floor, but it's okay. I left my mark. So I labeled all the samples. The first one did seep through the bottom of the mold and leached into the paper and then hardened. The second one and third one did not do that. So for the 1 to 2 iron to epoxy molds, it's still a little soft after 16 hours. It's like I can bend these teeth with my hands. With all of them, a lot of bubbles have raised to the surface, but it seems to me that the 1 to 1 and the 3 to 2 iron to epoxy mixes have shrinked in volume a bit, so they're no longer flush with the top as they were last night when I was filling them. So the main focus of this test was not to see which mix of epoxy to iron powder would make the strongest magnetic field, because obviously the more iron that was in the mix would benefit the magnetic field more generated inside the motor. The test here was to really see how well the two mixed together and how well they poured once mixed together. So obviously I think the highest mix that I can easily pour into the final mold is going to be the 3 to 2 iron to epoxy. Any higher than that, it doesn't really pour anymore. It's more of a a clumpy like Play-Doh, and I don't think that's going to work very well. So I think this is going to be my final decision. What to be done now would be to get more iron and to print the entire stator and fill the entire thing with the iron epoxy mix. So let's see if these are conductive whatsoever. So we're going to start with the 1 to 2 iron to epoxy. Whoops. So if I place them down on the sample, as you can see, they are not conductive. If I move them around at all, it is not conducting any electricity whatsoever, fully insulative. If I move to the 1 to 1 iron to epoxy, still nothing anywhere. And if I move to the highest ratio of 3 to 2 iron to epoxy, you can also see that it is not conducting any electricity anywhere. So all of these are perfect for making the motor stator out of, although I'm going to pick the one with the highest iron content. There should be very little to no bad eddy currents generated within the motor. There will still be eddy currents, but they'll be so small and constrained to each individual iron particle that it won't have a large or negative effect on the motor as a whole. The stator samples are done curing. The epoxy has all hardened, etc. And I got some N52 square neodymium magnets to see how attractive they are. And I mean, there's iron in it, of course it attracts magnets, but the 1 to 2 is not very attractive. The 1 to 1 is a lot stronger, and of course common sense would say that this would be the strongest. Jesus. Yeah, that's very sticky. So of course it works with the stator cores as well. And here's the most amount of iron. It's quite magnetic, which is very nice. More magnetic than the iron PLA from Protopasta was. So the next test is to actually pop them in my high-tech, high-temperature testing oven to simulate high temperatures within this motor caused by the coils wrapped around them. We're going to see how well this electronic potting epoxy handles, as well as the PLA molds that surrounds the epoxy. So I'm going to pop them in at 50 degrees Celsius, maybe even 100 degrees Celsius and 150 degrees Celsius. My motor should definitely not be getting this hot, but I want to make sure that it's not the plastic and epoxy that fails first. Okay, so I've got both samples set up on some metal trays, so in case they melt and burn, I don't ruin my high-tech heating oven. So it is heated up to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, the lowest this oven will go. It's about 80 degrees Celsius. Hopefully my motor will never get hotter than this. So if these samples withstand this heat for at least 5, maybe 10 minutes without deforming at all, this test will be a success. Alright, it's been 5 minutes. Let's pull these samples out. And let's see if... Uh-oh. Uh-oh. They are squishy. That's not good. Well, damn. Focus, you fuck. There we go. Yeah, well, they're not, permanently deformed, and currently it feels like the one with the higher iron content deforms less. As you can see, the 1-to-1 ratio is not as flexible when I squeeze it with my fingers. I did not put the 3-to-2 in because I kind of wanted to preserve at least one of them, but the epoxy itself is soft and it looks like some air bubbles have actually come to the top. I'm going to stick these in there for a little bit longer. Maybe even after just 48 hours this epoxy still hasn't finished curing. So I'm going to stick it in for a little bit longer and see what happens. But I'm going to keep the temperature constant. So they've now been in there for 10 minutes, and what it seems to be is it's not melting, but it is getting very soft and flexible. So this is the lowest. This was the 1 to 2 iron to epoxy, and this is very rubbery, very soft and flexible, but it returns to its original shape. It is flexible, but it's not permanently deformed. Where with the 1 to 1, and it's still warm, it is less flexible. Still flexible, but it's not as flexible as the lower iron content. So what seems to be happening is the higher iron in the epoxy is seeming to cause the epoxy to be stiffer under higher temperatures. Now, I wonder what would happen if I throw the 3 to 2 in as well with these other two and see how flexible that one is compared to these two. And I'm going to let these sit probably for another 15 minutes or maybe even longer. Since they're not melting or anything, they're just getting flaccid. Okay, so these have been in the oven for about 30 minutes now at 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 80 degrees Celsius for you metric folks. The lowest iron content Stator appears to be the most flexible, but still not permanently damaged. The one that is 1 to 1 iron to epoxy, stiffer, a lot stiffer, still not permanently damaged, but still flexible and squishy. And then I stuck this one into. This one was only in for about 20 minutes, but it's still just as hot as the others. It is the least flexible, still flexible, but least flexible, and is the most sturdy of all of them. So what appears to me is that the increased iron content appears to make the stators stiffer or more resilient to increased temperature, which is great actually. It's exactly what I wanted. I am going to stick this one in the oven probably at 100 degrees Celsius or 120 degrees Celsius for a lot longer now. I'm going to see if I can get the plastic or epoxy to degrade from the high temperature. I'm going to take these out because I don't really need them anymore. I'm going to keep them as samples. I don't want to wreck them. I'm going to torture test the actual iron to epoxy ratio now. So it's been 2 hours at about 100 degrees Celsius. The part is still very hot, but it has not deformed in any significant or bad way. It's still a little flexible, but honestly, this is going to work just great. It handled the temperature really well, and for that long without deforming permanently.